Phoebe Handsjuk was alive inside a luxury Melbourne tower, surrounded by glass walls, security cameras, and silence everywhere. Hours later, she was found 12 floors below, bleeding in the building's refuse room, with no clear answers. Police believed she entered the garbage chute herself, but the chute was narrow. Her jeans were undone too. And her family was left asking the question this case still cannot escape. Did Phoebe fall alone that night?
After all the fear, the fighting.
It's a death like no other. A young woman's body is found at the bottom of a garbage chute in a luxury Melbourne apartment complex.
Phoebe Handsjuk's death was as baffling as it is horrendous.
But answering the phone, and I said, "Have you found her?" And he said, "I hope you're sitting down."
The death of 24-year-old Phoebe Handsjuk is one of the city's most bizarre cases.
December 2nd, 2010, and this is the last time the 24-year-old is seen alive.
The homicide squad has been called in to investigate the death of a woman in Melbourne. The 24-year-old's body was discovered last night on the ground floor of a St Kilda Road apartment building.
But was it an accident, suicide, or murder? To police, it's suicide. A coroner decides it's a freak accident. But her family asks, was someone else involved?
The body is discovered in the refuse room on the ground floor of her apartment block.
Our family, it will never be the same. My other children, their lives will never be the same.
How did Phoebe die?
Before Phoebe became a headline, she was a daughter, sister, artist, and young woman fighting through pain quietly. She lived on the 12th floor of Balencea apartments, where polished walls hid a relationship already falling apart. In her final days, there were calls, concern, drinking, distress, and signs that something was breaking inside fast. Then, on December 2nd, 2010, the building's garbage room became the place where the mystery began for everyone. Upstairs, investigators saw broken glass, blood near a computer, strange notes, and an apartment that looked disturbed inside. Downstairs, Phoebe was gone, leaving behind injuries, unanswered questions, and a fall that never felt simple to many. The official explanation would point toward alcohol, medication, and accident, but her family saw something deeply wrong there. Because when evidence is missed and grief is dismissed, one question becomes impossible to silence inside this case. If Phoebe entered that chute alone, why did so many details seem to fight the official story itself? To understand Phoebe Handsjuk's death, we first have to understand the life everyone lost that cold December night forever. She was 24 years old, from Melbourne, and remembered by people close to her as still alive with feeling. Phoebe was not a statistic, not a headline, and not the final image attached to this case forever either. She was a daughter, a sister, an artist, and someone whose emotions often seemed larger than the room itself. People who knew Phoebe described a young woman with charm, humor, sensitivity, and a restless creative energy inside. She loved movement, color, people, nature, and the kind of freedom that made ordinary life feel too small. But behind that brightness, Phoebe also carried pain, and that pain made her final story easier to misread. A BC News later described Phoebe as a vibrant and loving young woman, a detail worth holding before suspicion rises. Because once a death becomes controversial, the person at the center can disappear behind theories and arguments too quickly. And that is why Phoebe's story should begin with who she was, not only how she suddenly died. She grew up in a family that knew both affection and concern, especially as Phoebe entered her teenage years. Like many young people carrying emotional weight, she sometimes searched for escape in alcohol, risk, and intense relationships. Her family worried, but they also loved her deeply, and that love never stopped after her death either. Her father, Len, was a psychiatrist, someone trained to understand distress, but this was his own daughter personally. How painful is it when professional knowledge cannot protect the person sleeping under your own family history anymore? Phoebe's mother, Natalie, her brothers, and her grandmother remained important figures in the emotional center of this case. Her grandmother was more than a relative. She was someone Phoebe could confide in during difficult private moments. That closeness matters, because in cases like this, final conversations often become evidence of emotional temperature and trust. Phoebe was known to struggle, but struggle is not the same thing as wanting life to end completely. That distinction would later become one of the quiet battles between the official explanation and her family's belief. By her early 20s, Phoebe was trying to build a life that still felt unfinished, messy, and possible. She worked at a hair salon in South Yarra, surrounded by beauty, conversation, clients, and daily movement around her. It was there that she met Antony Hampel, known to many people simply as Ant, an events promoter. He was older, socially connected, polished, and from a family with deep roots in Melbourne's legal establishment circles. The relationship began with attraction, but over time, people around Phoebe would describe something more unstable forming slowly. Phoebe eventually moved into the Balencea apartments on St. Kilda Road, where Antony lived on the 12th floor. From the outside, it looked like a glamorous address, the kind of building built to feel secure enough. Glass, height, controlled access, and city views created the image of safety, privacy, and adult success above Melbourne. But sometimes the most dangerous rooms are not hidden in dark alleys. They are behind expensive doors nearby. What happens when a place designed to protect someone becomes the last place they are seen alive forever? Inside that tower, Phoebe's relationship was reportedly becoming strained, with breakups, returns, arguments, and emotional exhaustion building steadily. Her friends and family saw signs that she was unhappy, and professionals heard concerns about the relationship too. Still, leaving a complicated relationship is rarely simple when love, fear, history, and hope keep pulling backward again. Phoebe reportedly left and returned more than once, a pattern that made the final return feel haunting later. Each return could have looked like reconciliation from outside, but inside, the pressure seemed to build again quietly. That is the cruel trap of a toxic bond. It can feel like escape and home together again. By the final week, small details were starting to gather like storm clouds around Phoebe's private life quietly. There were concerns about drinking, emotional distress, phone calls, and whether she felt safe inside the relationship anymore. None of those details alone proves what happened, but together they changed how the final night feels completely. Because when someone dies in an impossible way, the days before death become part of the scene too. At this point, the story is not yet about the chute, it is about the pressure above it. Every unanswered question later would return to this same place: Phoebe's apartment, Phoebe's relationship, and Phoebe's final hours. So Chapter 1 leaves us with Phoebe alive, loved, struggling, and standing inside a life already cracking open. And the real mystery begins when that private pressure follows her back to the 12th floor again alone. By the time Phoebe moved into Balencea apartments, the relationship already carried a pressure outsiders could not easily measure. Antony Hampel was older, well-connected, socially confident, and living inside a world that appeared polished from outside. Phoebe was younger, emotionally intense, and still searching for stability while trying to understand where she truly belonged. On paper, they looked like a glamorous Melbourne couple, but private rooms often tell different stories than photographs. Their relationship was reportedly unstable, marked by separations, returns, arguments, and moments that worried people close to Phoebe. A BC News reported the inquest heard Phoebe was upset about her relationship before her death, according to court material. That detail matters, because emotional context changes how we hear every phone call, every silence, and every final movement. When someone is struggling inside a relationship, the outside world can miss the danger until everything collapses suddenly. But was this only emotional chaos, or was something more controlling beginning to form around Phoebe's final days? People close to Phoebe later described concern about the dynamic between her and Antony, especially as breakups repeated. She reportedly left him several times before returning again, a pattern that can exhaust the strongest person emotionally. Each return might have looked like forgiveness, but it could also show how hard leaving had truly become. That is what makes this stage of the story so painful. Phoebe was not frozen in one decision. She seemed torn between wanting freedom and being pulled back into a life that kept hurting her again. In the days before her death, the emotional pressure became sharper, and ordinary interactions started feeling heavier afterward. There was a dinner with friends where tension reportedly surfaced, and Phoebe seemed unable to speak freely that evening. Afterward, the conflict did not end quietly. It followed the couple back toward the apartment building again afterward. Phoebe was reportedly upset, and soon after she went out drinking with someone from her social circle nearby. During that time, phone contact from Antony became one of the most disturbing details in the timeline later. Reports and later retellings describe repeated calls, creating the image of a woman being pursued through her phone. Imagine trying to breathe for 1 hour, while the same name keeps lighting up your screen repeatedly again. At what point does concern stop sounding like care and start feeling like control, closing in completely around you? Phoebe's phone situation would later become even more troubling, because one phone reportedly disappeared and was never recovered. In true crime cases, missing devices can become emotional ghosts, because they may hold context no witness remembers clearly. A phone can reveal fear, planning, apologies, pressure, or the final words someone never said aloud clearly before. But without it, the timeline becomes weaker, and silence begins replacing what could have been evidence forever afterward. The night before her death, Phoebe did not simply drift peacefully toward the tragedy, waiting upstairs alone unnoticed. She had reportedly stayed away from the apartment, angry and distressed, before returning when Antony was at work. That return feels important because it suggests she was navigating the relationship carefully, not randomly moving through time. The next day, she had plans, messages, and reasons for people to believe life was still moving forward. Yet she also appeared to be struggling, drinking, and reaching out during an emotional spiral that frightened family. This is where the story becomes difficult, because pain can be real without explaining the ending completely alone. What if everyone saw fragments of Phoebe's distress, but nobody saw the full shape forming behind her privately? Her loved ones later had to replay every message, every call, and every warning sign again afterward painfully. That is the torture families face after a suspicious death. Memory becomes both evidence and punishment forever afterward. For Phoebe's family, the relationship background did not prove a crime, but it refused to feel irrelevant later. The official path would later focus heavily on intoxication, medication, and the possibility of a tragic accident instead. But families often look beyond toxicology. Because they remember tone, fear, hesitation, and patterns officials cannot test fully. By this point, Phoebe's final hours were already surrounded by contradictions that would only grow darker later still. She was distressed, but she was also loved, impaired, but still human. Vulnerable, but not invisible either then. And if her relationship had become a pressure chamber, then the apartment was no longer just a home. It was the place where private tension, unanswered calls, missing evidence, and one impossible chute would soon collide. What happened next would turn those private warning signs into a public mystery that still refuses to settle. Because once Phoebe returned to that 12th floor, the story moved from concern into catastrophe very quickly afterward. And before investigators could explain the fall, the relationship itself had already become impossible to ignore completely afterward. On December 2nd, 2010, Phoebe returned to Balencea Apartments, and the ordinary timeline began turning into something terrifying quickly. That morning, a fire alarm briefly pushed residents outside, placing Phoebe on camera with her dog near midday again. She returned to the building, went back upstairs, and after that, the hours grew disturbingly quiet for everyone involved. Between afternoon and evening, investigators would later face the hardest part of this case: a silence without witnesses anywhere. Inside the apartment, signs of disturbance would later raise questions that simple explanations could not completely settle afterward either. There was broken glass, blood near the computer, strange notes, and an atmosphere that suggested chaos before disappearance upstairs. Downstairs, the building continued normally, with residents moving through hallways, elevators, entrances, and ordinary evening routines around Melbourne below. How can a life be ending inside one building while everyone else continues their evening completely unaware nearby, outside? Before 7 that night, Phoebe somehow ended up inside the garbage chute connected to the 12th floor apartment. The opening was not a doorway, not a stairwell, and not a place designed for human movement below. It was a narrow disposal point, built for rubbish, positioned above the floor, and difficult to enter alone. Yet the official explanation would later suggest Phoebe entered it herself while impaired, confused, and possibly disoriented then. She fell 12 stories through darkness, feet first, toward the refuse area beneath the apartment tower far below. SBS News reported Phoebe plunged 12 floors down the chute at the luxury complex where she lived with Antony. That confirmed fact is horrific enough, but the details waiting below made the story even harder to accept. Phoebe survived the fall long enough for the final scene to become almost unbearable for her family afterward. She was found in the refuse area, near garbage equipment, after suffering injuries that caused catastrophic bleeding below. The thought of her alive after impact is one of the cruelest details in the entire case itself. What does a person feel in those final moments when help is above, around, but still unreachable nearby? The discovery came when a concierge tried accessing the refuse area and found something blocking the door completely. Behind that obstruction was Phoebe, wounded, alone, and already becoming the center of a mystery nobody expected there. Emergency responders were called, police arrived, and the building's private nightmare suddenly became an official investigation scene outside. But the first decisions made around a death scene can shape everything that follows, sometimes permanently afterward, forever. The refuse area was treated as a crime scene, yet the urgency of medical intervention became complicated immediately. A paramedic reportedly was not allowed to enter because police were preserving the scene from contamination there initially. That decision may have followed procedure, but emotionally it left a question that still feels brutal today, afterward. Could anything have changed if someone had been allowed to check Phoebe sooner inside that room immediately afterward? Upstairs, the apartment itself offered a second scene, one that seemed too messy to ignore completely afterward, too. Blood, glass, notes, and personal belongings created a picture that did not feel peaceful or straightforward inside at all. Antony reportedly arrived home before Phoebe was found, noticed disorder, and said she was not there anymore inside. He later interacted with police after learning a woman had been discovered downstairs inside the building complex below. For investigators, this should have been the moment every object, device, stain, and timeline became precious evidence immediately. But according to later criticism, potential evidence was either missed, delayed, photographed poorly, or never fully tested properly. SBS News reported the inquest heard the concierge's logbook page for that day was mysteriously ripped out entirely. That single detail may sound small, but in a suspicious timeline, even missing paper starts feeling loud afterward. When records disappear, viewers do not hear silence. They hear the shape of something being removed instead deliberately. The same article reported counsel assisting said another person's involvement could not be totally discounted on the evidence. That line matters because it shows doubt existed inside the formal process, not only inside speculation itself later. The investigation had begun, but already the case was splitting into two realities that could not merge together. One reality saw a tragic accident involving alcohol, medication, confusion, and a dangerous garbage chute below that night. The other saw a disturbed apartment, difficult chute access, missing context, and evidence deserving deeper testing afterward too. Between those realities stood Phoebe's family, forced to watch uncertainty harden into an official direction afterward, painfully alone. By the end of that night, Phoebe was gone, but the real fight had only started now, officially. Because the haunting part was not only how she died, it was how quickly answers began slipping away. Chapter 4 begins with the most uncomfortable twist in Phoebe's case. The official answer depended on an unlikely movement. The story was not simply that Phoebe fell, it was that she somehow placed herself inside the chute. That distinction changes everything, because falling from a ledge is different from entering a narrow mechanical opening alone. Investigators accepted that she could have climbed in while affected by alcohol, medication, and a confused mental state. But her family kept returning to the same physical problem. The chute did not behave like an open door. It was small, awkward, high from the floor, and designed to swallow rubbish, not a human body above. Crime Reads later published an excerpt from Robin Bowles' investigation, describing the night as evidence of a bungled case. That article matters because it slows the story down and forces attention onto the ordinary details missed early. Antony reportedly came home, saw Phoebe missing, noticed her bag and keys, yet did not immediately report her missing. According to that account, her father suggested a missing person report, but Antony believed she would return soon. Individually, those decisions may have explanations, but together they created a rhythm that felt wrong to her family. Then came another layer. The apartment itself did not look like a calm place before a sleepwalking accident. Broken glass, blood, strange notes, burning candles, and a plugged-in hair straightener all created a disturbed picture upstairs. If this was an accidental sleepwalking episode, why did the surrounding room appear to carry signs of conflict? The deeper question was not only how Phoebe entered the chute, but what happened before she reached it. Her jeans were reportedly undone and pulled down, a detail that never sat comfortably inside the accident theory. Her sunglasses were found near her body, raising another strange image inside a scene already crowded with contradictions. A fall through a chute might explain injuries, but it does not automatically explain clothing, objects, and timing. That is where the case begins turning from tragedy into a puzzle about sequence, behavior, and missing proof. Phoebe's grandfather, a retired detective, reportedly challenged the idea that she could have entered the chute alone unaided. His concern was practical, not emotional. Could someone Phoebe's size physically maneuver into that opening without outside help? Tests and demonstrations later became part of public discussion because the family wanted the chute theory examined more visually. That matters for storytelling. But it matters more for justice, because physical reality cannot be argued away easily. If a theory requires a wounded, impaired woman to perform a difficult movement, that theory must be tested carefully. Here, the alleged motive was never proven, and no court found Antony responsible for Phoebe's death at all. But suspicion does not always begin with proof. Sometimes it begins when behavior, benefit, and opportunity overlap closely. For viewers, this is the dangerous part of the case, because speculation can easily outrun confirmed evidence quickly. So the fair question is not who definitely planned anything, but what someone would have needed if they did. They would need access to the apartment floor, knowledge of the building, control over timing, and confidence afterward. They would also need a confusing scene that could be read as self-destruction, accident, or intoxicated misadventure later. That does not prove a plan existed, but it explains why the family struggled with the official conclusion. Because once police moved towards suicide or accident early, crucial evidence could become less urgent almost immediately afterward. Phones were not seized in the first critical window, and complete CCTV recovery became a painful issue later. What disappears fastest in a case like this? Evidence, memory, or the chance to ask the right questions? By the time doubts grew louder, the cleanest investigative moment had already passed, and reconstruction became harder later. That is why the word motive must be handled carefully here, because no confirmed criminal motive exists legally. Still, people questioned whether reputation, control, relationship pressure, or later financial issues shaped the atmosphere around Phoebe privately. Those are not verdicts, they are investigative questions that became impossible to ignore once the evidence felt incomplete. The major twist is that the official story did not silence suspicion, it made suspicion louder for many. Instead of closing the case, the accident theory forced everyone back toward the same narrow, opening upstairs again. Could grief alone explain the family's doubts, or did the evidence itself refuse to settle into place anymore? By the end of this chapter, the mystery is no longer only about Phoebe's fall through darkness alone. It is about whether the first explanation was built too quickly before the hardest possibilities were examined enough. And once that question enters the story, every later decision begins to look heavier, stranger, and more consequential. Because sometimes the twist is not a hidden confession, sometimes it is the official answer failing emotionally publicly. After the official ruling, Phoebe's family did not receive closure. They received another wound layered over permanent grief. Antony Hampel, Phoebe's mother, saw the same evidence and still could not accept the accident explanation completely afterward. Her grandfather, Lord Campbell, had spent his life around investigations, and this one troubled him from the beginning. He was not just a grieving relative, he was a retired detective staring at work he believed failed badly. 9 News reported Phoebe's family vowed the mystery surrounding her death would one day be solved in public someday. That promise matters because families rarely keep fighting for years unless unanswered details keep reopening the same wound. Natalie reportedly disputed the coroner's accident ruling, while Lauren focused on the chute's physical difficulty and unusual height. To them, the question was not emotional denial, it was whether the official theory matched physical reality itself. When a family challenges a ruling, critics can call it grief. But grief does not invent evidence alone. It remembers details, repeats timelines, and refuses to accept answers that feel physically impossible to the heart forever. What would you do if the person you loved died? And every explanation made the pain feel worse. For Phoebe's family, the most painful part was not only losing her, it was watching certainty disappear too. They had to live with images no family should carry: the chute, the refuse room, and blood downstairs. They also had to hear their daughter's final moments reduced into theories about alcohol, medication, and sleepwalking alone. Those factors were real parts of the record, but they never answered every question left painfully behind afterward. 9 News also reported Phoebe survived the fall before bleeding to death from a catastrophic leg injury below alone. That detail changes the emotional weight of everything because it means Phoebe's final struggle did not end instantly. She was not simply found after a fall, she was found after fighting for life in darkness below. For a family, that knowledge can become unbearable because imagination starts filling the dark space before discovery forever. The building that once looked secure became, in their memories, the place where help arrived too late downstairs. Years passed, but the case did not fade the way official files often hope old pain fades quietly. Media coverage, podcasts, articles, and public discussion kept returning to the same narrow opening above Melbourne again repeatedly. Why does this case keep resurfacing when so many other tragedies disappear quietly from public memory afterwards so often? Because the details do not sit still. They keep pressing against the official conclusion with quiet force again. The bruises, clothing, missing evidence, delayed CCTV recovery, and disputed chute access remain central to public doubt today. None of that legally proves murder, and the script must stay fair to the record at every step. But it explains why Phoebe's family and many viewers still feel the accident ruling leaves space behind for them. The case later gained another disturbing layer when public discussion connected Antony Hampel to Bailey Schneider's death publicly. Bailey died in 2018, and the coroner later found her death was self-inflicted after relationship distress publicly afterward. That separate case did not prove anything about Phoebe, but it intensified public attention around Antony's relationships afterward. Responsible storytelling must separate suspicion from proof, because two tragedies can raise questions without creating convictions by themselves. Still, viewers naturally notice patterns, especially when two young women connected to one man die unusually so young. That is why the final chapter cannot pretend this story ended cleanly when the file officially closed for everyone. It ended legally, but emotionally it kept moving through interviews, family memories, and unanswered public conversations long afterward. Is an official finding enough when the people closest to the victim still believe truth remains hidden forever? Today, the public record still leaves Phoebe's death officially treated as an accident, not a homicide case today. No person has been convicted for causing her death, and Antony Hampel has denied involvement in it publicly. Yet the emotional status of this case remains different from the legal status written on paper today, even now. Legally, the finding stands. Emotionally, the family's questions still stand beside it, refusing to move away publicly today. That divide is why this case remains painful. The paperwork closed, but the human wound stayed open for everyone. Phoebe Handsjuk's story remains powerful because it exposes the gap between closure and paperwork so clearly for families everywhere. Sometimes a case becomes unforgettable, not because there is one shocking clue, but because every clue echoes afterward. Her family wanted a fuller answer, and many people still feel the evidence deserved deeper attention from investigators. So Phoebe remains more than a tragic figure at the bottom of a Melbourne apartment tower alone anymore. She remains a daughter whose final hours still ask whether justice was lost somewhere between floors, forever unanswered. News reported the coroner ruled out foul play, but Phoebe's family never accepted that ending as complete closure. That is where Phoebe Handsjuk's story remains today, legally answered, emotionally unfinished, and still questioned by many people. No person has been convicted for causing her death, and the official finding still points toward an accident. But the bruises, the chute, the apartment, missed evidence, and her family's grief still refuse to stay silent. Maybe the hardest part is not choosing one theory, it is admitting how many questions were left behind. Phoebe was not just the woman in the garbage chute, she was loved long before the mystery began. This case required extensive research and was very time-consuming. So complete investigation resources will be linked in the description. You can read those resources, compare the official findings with the family's concerns, and decide what the evidence says. If this documentary kept you thinking, subscribe to the channel, hit the bell icon, and share this video. And leave your thoughts respectfully in the comments, because Phoebe's story deserves attention, care, and truth.